Thank you. Everyone here taking the present body, I would love to introduce. I'm sure most of you already know Miss Mythili very well. Okay. Miss Mythili is an economics banker turned journalist. She's been working with the Economic Times as a consulting editor since 2006. So please welcome Miss Mythili. I request Mrs. Swami Gupta to please come on stage and order Miss Mythili. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you very much for having me here. I think after the first two sessions, I know some of the I had some Bhusnurmath also, and I think they were all telling you about dreams, etc., etc. So now it's my unpleasant job to bring you down. But I'm going to talk about something that is very basic to all of us, whether we have dreams or not. Basically, roti, kapra, makan, right? Where do we get the basics of life? And before I start, I have a request. I am a journalist, so there are no holy cows whatsoever. You're free to ask me any question. There is nothing that you cannot ask me. But what I would request is if you're getting very late, I'd like to ideally finish my presentation and then take questions. So the two ways are doing it. Whenever you have a question, please jot it down. I'll try and finish within 45 minutes. So if we have about 15-20 minutes to start, carry on, take off your answers. But there might be some cases where I ask you for some input, in which case I'd be really very happy if all of you participated, right? So is that okay? Rules of the game set? No issues? Not going to shift the goalposts in between? Okay, so let's start. Okay, so I just thought, I agree all of you are doing MBA. So you wonder, why am I going to talk about the budget? Why has Satya asked me to talk about the budget? I mean, budget is what babus do, sitting in government offices, what journalists talk about, etc. But somebody sitting in a corporate office, what does the union budget have to do with the job? But let me tell you, the union budget impacts every one of us, regardless of whether you're doing a corporate job, whether you're doing a government job, whether you're man in the street, etc. So unless you have some understanding of the union budget, or any government budget for that matter, I think it's very difficult for you to relate to anything else that you do. So let's start with the budget. And I've called it the Great Indian Budget, a bit like the Great Indian Wedding, because it's very similar to that. There's a lot of drama. In fact, the traditional thing, the way of the budget preparations start in North Block, which is where the finance ministry is located, is by they have this tradition of making halwa. Now that is why you see there's another comparison with a budget and a wedding. A wedding in India is all about eating, and eating essentially sweets, right? So the union budget preparation also starts with, the preparation starts with a huge karai that they have and they make halwa in it. That's how they start. Okay, and then go on to the more nasty parts of the budget, which is about taxation, expenditure, etc. So let's plunge straight away into what makes the budget. So let me just give you an outline of my presentation. So what is it all about? Why do government's budgets differ from other budgets? Everybody has a budget, right? When you get your salary, the first thing that you should do, at least ideally, is draw up a budget, because you must know how much your income is and how much your expenditure is. And it won't do, even in the day of credit cards, if you consistently live beyond your income, you're going to be in dire trouble, right? So everybody makes a budget, regardless of whether you're an individual or whether you're a household. And governments also necessarily make a budget. So how do government's budgets differ from others? Then I'm going to the issue of politics versus economics, which is more important, and then we'll start very briefly on the budget for this year, which is going to be presented when? On the 29th of February, right? It's only because this is a leap year that we're going to have presented on the 29th of February. And there was one very famous finance minister whose birthday also happened to fall on the same day. Who was that? Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so this year we're going to have the budget on the 29th of February. And at least before I continue, one more quick clarification. I tend to talk very fast. If you think I'm going too fast, please raise your hand and tell me. I will try and slow down. Okay, so the bullet train is not yet here. I'm a bit like the bullet train, but it hasn't yet come, so please slow me down. Okay. So what is the budget really all about? So what is the budget about? If you look at the Wikipedia, look at the dictionary, look anywhere, it tells you a budget is a pretty boring kind of thing. It's basically what anybody understands from the term budget, even the layman would understand from this. It's basically an estimate of income and expenditure for a set period of time, usually for 1 year. So if it's something that's just about numbers, how much income you have, how much expenditure you have, then why are we talking about politics, economics? Where does all this coming? Right? So that is why we say, why should we talk at all about economics, politics? Budget should ideally be just about basic boring accountancy. And I hope there are not too many commerce graduates or CAs over here, but accountancy by and large is a very boring job, right? It's only the consultancy part of accounting and CA. Everybody becomes join as a CA, and then nobody wants to do the audit, which is the basic accounting part of it. Everybody wants to do consultancy. That's about cycling part of it. Audit is all about numbers, very boring kind of job. So budgets should also be pretty boring. So why is it that we talk about economics, politics? Same question. Please let's move on very quickly. So this I just saw something to wake you up, but maybe after series are all away. So this is basically the poor guy sees such a small little piece of paper, and you're trying to snip at it with this huge scissor. And obviously, if you're the finance minister, you're very worried because in the process you might slip something about government, apart from the fact that they can create mayhem in parliament. If you go to parliament in the visitors gallery and make even a little bit of noise, the marshal will immediately come and throw you out. But you see what's happening inside the well of parliament. It's very different, right? So clearly there are some privileges which parliamentarians, governments have already citizens like you and I don't have, even though we're discussing freedom, right to freedom of expression, things like that. Clearly there are freedoms and freedoms, right? So how is it that government's budgets differ? Yeah, how do they differ?
Government budgets rather than individual budgets. In a sense, you can easily have a deficit for ongoing periods of time.
Okay. Okay, so I just in the interest of time, I just look very quickly. So he says that the basic difference between government and others is that government can keep spending, and that's one advantage that you and I don't have, because as I said, even in a credit card culture, there's a limit beyond how much one can spend. All of you who are presumably still studying, you know that even the most indulgent father has his limits. Beyond a certain point, he's not going to send you any more money. Okay, so I take questions and really, I know you. Yeah, sorry. Yeah, good. Yeah. So this, okay. So how do they differ? Because government really has powers, as we said, that individuals, corporates just don't have. What is the most important part that they have? Of course, the part that we said of being able to borrow, spend in excess, etc., is a very important part. But the most important part really that the government has, and we vote them into power to do this. Can you believe it? We actually vote them into power and tell them you can do this. What do? Power to tax. You and I cannot tax. As much as I would like to tax each and every one of you, and you might like to tax me for making you sit and listen to my lecture, You can't do it, sorry, buddy, because if you try to impose a tax, I'm not going to pay. So governments have the ability to tax. They vote in them into power, we give them a certain authority, so they have the power to tax which nobody else can. So this is the first thing that sets governments apart, any government anywhere in the world. They also have the power to print money. You and I cannot print money. Much as I would like the idea of being able to just print a little piece of paper and hand it out to everybody, because we can't do it. Governments have the ability to print money. And if you're the US government, you have the ability to print money, little pieces of green paper that everybody all over the world wants. Unfortunately, the Indian rupee beyond Nepal, nobody wants. That's a tragedy, right? But one day we will also print green pieces of paper, maybe tricolor pieces of paper, and we will do what Janet Yellen and Obama are doing, print pieces of paper very happily, and all over the world, like morons, like idiots, we're scrambling to get that dollar, right? So governments can print money. That is another very unique part. And then, as I said, they can borrow. They can borrow almost unlimited. And the difference between individuals and corporates is, can I have silence, please? Because I know I said I'm pretty liberal and I'm a journalist, but one thing I do want is that only one person at a time talks. So can I have silence? Okay, so that again was part of the ground rules that I left out. Okay, sorry, I'm a bit of a dictator, huh? So, so the power to borrow, and I said, and without collateral. If you try to go and borrow, you try to borrow against, you want to take a housing loan, the bank will say, oh yes, of course. Lots of banks are chasing you to take housing loans. What will they do? They want a mortgage on that house, right? So government alone has the ability to print IOUs, government IOUs, that is government securities, and not offer you any kind of collateral at all. So this again makes government very different from any other entity. Another key difference really, which really brings down to the essence of what budget preparation is all about. In a democracy, what are governments all about? They basically framed with one very unstated objective. No government is ever going to tell you this. But the basic objective is, I want to get re-elected. And I will do whatever is possible to get re-elected. Never mind what it does to the country's finances, because that is the nature of democracy. In a democracy where there is one man, one vote, and particularly a democracy like ours, where it is a first past the post, that means you can come to power with just 20% of the votes, 30% of the votes, not necessarily a majority. The most important objective really of any government, when you're framing a budget, what do I do? How do I ensure that 5 years hence, 3 years hence, 2 years hence, and particularly if it is 1 year hence, what can I do to ensure that I get re-elected? Now, this is something I never asked to you because you're not going to get re-elected, or none of us is going to really face an election unless we opt to join, forget our MBA dreams, and join politics. Much harder life, huh? So another other objectives, of course, are do want economic growth and development. That's a little unfair to our politicians. At some level, everybody who is a citizen of this country does want to see the country in a better place. So you do want economic growth, you do want development, you do want to see some kind of poverty alleviation, and you also want to ensure that the growth goes hand in hand with equity. I don't know how many of you have read Tom Piketty's book, which talks about the growing inequality in the world. And clearly, in a country like India, you cannot have growing inequality. If you had growing inequality, you have that red belt which is right there now in the center of the country. That would be spreading, and all our futures would be endangered, right? So these are the basic objectives for any budget, and this is then a key difference of the government. So where does politics really enter into all this? Now that I've told you about the budget, because the spending pattern really reflects the government's political ideology. So for the UPA government, things like Manrega, things like food subsidy, things like the Land Acquisition Act, these are very important. So because the UPA government, if you were to look very broadly and generally categorize them, you could broadly say that they were left of center. They believe much more in Mrs. Indira Gandhi, the earlier Mrs. G, the more powerful, if I may say, Mrs. G. They believe in certain socialist kind of policies. So their spending pattern reflected that ideology, right? So politics enter through their spending pattern. Politics also enters through revenue mobilization. Because what does it do? You decide you're going to have, what kind of taxation are you going to have? Are you going to tax the rich man at 97%? Because that is what Mrs. Gandhi did. Because during Mrs. Gandhi's days, she felt a rich person must be penalized. A rich person must pay a very high rate of taxation. So she raised the marginal rate of taxation to 97%. Now, what do? What happens when you have to pay 97% tax? What do you think happens? If you were working and you had to pay 97% tax for every 100 rupees, if you have to give the government 97% of it, regardless of what your political leanings are, regardless of whether you believe in the ideology of that government's power or not, what would you would do? You have to pay 97 rupees out of every 100 to the government by way of taxation. Why? Because the government believes that a rich man must contribute more. So each according to his ability, isn't it? That's what Karl Marx said. Each according to his ability, to each according to his need. So if your ability, you are rich, you are Mukesh Ambani, why can't you pay out 97 rupees out of every 100? What is wrong with that? Would you be happy with that? Yeah, I know, but let me just ask somebody else. Everybody else is happy? Silence is assent. Okay? So at least let us know, note down the names, and whichever job they get, please tell their employer that these are kids who are very happy to pay 97 rupees out of every 100. Swachh Bharat says, stand up India, sit up India, shut up India, nobody has get said. This is what we should say, because ultimately you need to get down and work. It's not a question of just giving activisms and all very well, but ultimately, unless you put your nose to the grindstone and work, there's not going to be any India very soon, right? So ultimately, you need to know that if you are going to charge somebody 97%, people are just going to stop working. And that's what did happen in India during the socialist days. Ultimately, we settled down to this what was called very relatively the Hindu way to grow. It was 3-4%, nothing much changed. Regardless of what is happening in the rest of the world, India grew at about 3-4%. So that was always a Hindu way to grow. So clearly, both your spending priorities as well as your revenue priorities will depend on what kind of political ideology you choose. Does this mean that there's never been any meeting ground between economics and politics? Can good economics, is it always bad politics? And good politics, is it always bad economics? So this is what we really need to think. So the basic issue, as I said, in any decision of the government is something that economists like to call time inconsistency. What is time inconsistency? The basic problem between your short term and your long term. So if you are short term and you want to be re-elected, say in a state like Punjab, what would you promise the farmers? Right? You would promise them free power, isn't it? Because what do farmers do with that power? They take out the water from underground sources of water and they're able to irrigate their fields and you have a very prosperous agriculture there, right? But what is the long-term consequence? The water table is receding. Because power is cheap, you use water very foolishly, you just flood your fields, you don't feel like drip irrigation. So between short term and long term, there's always a difference in your objectives. What is short term, what makes sense short term, may not necessarily make short sense long term, particularly when it comes to the economic arena. Unfortunately, our politicians, governments are all elected for 5 terms, maybe less. So if you are wanting to be re-elected, if you are the chief minister of Punjab, you will definitely go into the election campaign and say, I will give free power to everybody. If you say, no, I can't give free power to you today, because if I give free power to you today, your children and grandchildren will die of thirst. There will be no water in the state anymore. The land of 5 rivers will not have any water at all. But will you vote? You say, why do I worry about children and grandchildren? Who knows where they will be? Average person in Punjab, that is your ultimate dream, no? US, Canada, you don't want to stay in Punjab, right? Everybody in Punjab, unfortunately, and that's a different exaggeration. Fortunately, we have enough people who want to stay and make this a better place. But the longer term perspective, you're not thinking about the longer term perspective. You want free water today. You want free power today. Why did Casey was re-elected? Because he said, I'll waive your power bills, I'll waive your water bills. So nobody stood up and asked him and said, okay, today you waive my power bills, but tomorrow will you ensure that I have power? How will I have power if I don't pay for my power? How am I going to set up power plants? How am I going to have water purification plants? Isn't it? So these are questions that very few people ask. And unfortunately, politicians ride on this kind of populism and say they do that primarily because of the time inconsistency. So as I said, economics versus politics is essentially a question of what do you do? Do you teach a man to fish or do you give him a fish a day? Wonderful. If everybody would give me a fish a day, I wouldn't come here today to Korea launch on a Sunday. I would have nothing out of it, right? So clearly, if you're going to get everything coming to our house for free and not do anything, that's what all of us would prefer, right? But how long can the country give anybody a fish a day? Even the most socialist of governments, even the communist governments, which believe that they would decide for everybody. They don't want people to kind of have this horrible capitalist notion of profit, you know. So this ultimately you cannot continue to give a man fish a day. So the best thing to do is to teach him how to fish. Once you have taught him how to fish, then with that money, He can buy murgi, he can buy mutton, he can buy chawal, whatever he wants. Otherwise, if you give him fish every day, he will rather to eat the fish. If you are Bengali, you'll be very happy. If you're from Kerala, also you'll be very happy. But if you are from a good little giant from Gujarat, what would you do with the fish? You have to go around looking for somebody who will buy your fish to buy your matti ki roti, sarson ka saag or whatever. So the best thing to do is teach a man how to fish. That really is the best answer, but it's much, much more difficult. How to teach people how to fish? You have to educate them, you have to send them to schools, you have to give them opportunities, you have to give them ensure that there is medical facilities, you have to ensure that there are roads, etc. So what do you really do? So this really is the key. And as you can see, just as the elephant has actually managed to balance on a beach ball, it's not really that difficult. The question is that you need to kind of communicate. Governments need to communicate. They need to tell the electric that when I charge you for power, I'm going to charge you power, but it doesn't mean that after charging you for power, I don't give you power. I will charge you for power and you in turn hold me accountable for delivering that power. That is what democracy is all about. We elect governments, give them the power to tax, we pay our taxes hopefully dutifully, and then ask them, what have you done with my tax money? You told me that you would give me law and order. You tell me that I would be safe to go on the road. Whereas today, if you go to Haryana, what are the Gujarats doing? They're burning the buses, they're burning the cars. So I didn't give you my tax money to allow you to do allow the Gujarats to do this. I gave you tax money to ensure that I could live in this country as a free human being. So what are you doing? So I think that is where the job really of the citizen is. So now let's quickly get into the budget for this year. So what is the backdrop? So let's look at the economic situation today. What is the backdrop? What is the biggest challenge that we have today? The biggest challenge that we really have today is how do we spur growth? The latest estimates from the CSO, which is the Central Statistical Organization, is that India will grow at about 7.6% this year. Now that is the fastest rate of growth amongst almost all major countries. Even better, it is faster than China. Whatever else we do, we want to be better than China. It doesn't matter what. Okay? So this is a big bugbear. You're always comparing India and China. India, all kinds of terms are used for it. It's always that's one big thing that we have. We've always got this so-called inferiority complex, quote unquote, vis-a-vis China. But what we don't understand is that it's quite a ridiculous thing to compare us with China by comparing apples and oranges. Because do you think I can stand over here if I was in China and criticize the Chinese leadership? What would happen? Even before I got out of the room, I'd find somebody waiting me to take me to the equivalent of Bihar, right? Whereas today, I can stand here and criticize the government within reasonable limits, right? Certainly, if I'm going to say something that is inciting violence, I will be behind bars, which is why we get to the entire issue of what is freedom of speech, what are reasonable restrictions, etc. But there is a difference in the political system in India and China. So clearly, we will not be able to move as fast as China, and that has its limitations. The advantage is that when this great Indian elephant moves, we all move in one direction. It is not like in China where you say the government suddenly decides one child policy. Everybody will have only one child. What happened when poor Sanjay Gandhi, and using the word poor, quote unquote, poor Sanjay Gandhi decided that population is a big problem and tried forcible sterilization? You know what happened, right? So we value our freedoms. The question is, though we value our freedoms, is freedom as important to me as it is to a hungry person? There one needs to make a slight distinction. When I'm sure where my next meal is coming from, and I'm sure I'm going to get my next meal, I value political freedoms. When I'm absolutely dirt poor and tomorrow doesn't offer me a better day, then I'm not sure whether I want political freedoms or not. So this is something we can discuss afterwards. But basically the advantage is that political freedoms do curtail the speed at which you go. A classic example is the land acquisition bill. The earlier government passed a bill, the present government wants to make some amendments to that bill. These amendments, to somebody of my kind of thinking, are very warranted because the land acquisition bill, as passed by the UPA government, makes industrialization virtually impossible. Any industrialization does mean taking land away from farming. If you recall, all countries started out as agrarian societies. When you move away from agriculture to industrial and into service societies, by taking agricultural land and using it for other purposes, the idea is that you give people whose land you are taking, give them opportunities to earn their livelihood elsewhere. If you look at any pool of farmers, every farmer almost wants to give up farming and move to something else. So he's not unhappy about your taking land. He is unhappy about the fact that when you take his land away, you're not giving him an alternate means of livelihood. So that really is the issue. So though the present government wants to amend the land acquisition bill, it's not been able to do it because our political system is such that in the parliament, the Congress party, which is the opposition, does not allow any serious business to be conducted. And before we point a finger at the UPA and the Congress, let's not forget that the BJP did very much the same thing when they were in opposition, right? So we need to have a mature political system. Unfortunately, our politicians don't really have the maturity that we wish they would have. So we are paying the price, and we can discuss whether we are willing to pay that price or not. But as I said, the key question really is that at 7.6, is it good enough to lift every Indian out of poverty? It's certainly not. Is it our potential? No, we're not growing at our potential. So clearly we need to spur economic growth. And budget really, look at the budget, it has only one lever. That is a fiscal lever. It means either the government can spend more on roads, railways, bridges, schools, things like that, or it can tax more and get more revenue, right? Or it can tax less and tell people to spend, or it can do what this government is going to do, so implement the 7th pay commission and give all government people a much higher salary, and hope that their spending will spur the economy. You can argue whether giving just a small, minuscule section of the population such largesse is the right way to do it or not. So that again is where politics comes into it, because government wants the vote of the central government employees, of the college lecturers and professors, of public sector employees. So this really is where the budget can play a role. So the key question at today's juncture is, should the government adhere to the fiscal roadmap that is outlined earlier? Because every government comes out with what is known as a mid-term fiscal roadmap. So the present government also has come out with a mid-term fiscal roadmap. So the key question is that today, when the economy is not growing at potential, when we need to grow much faster to lift every Indian out of poverty, should we stick to that fiscal roadmap? Is it some kind of Lakshman Rekha? Is it cast in stone? Or should we allow a small breach in that and allow it to support growth? So that really is a key question that basically has to battle with. So let's look at this question in the background of what is the state of our economy at the moment. So if you want to look at the health of the economy at every point in time, there are basically four broad layers. One is your GDP growth, which is a gross domestic product, which is the level of economic activity. And the other is the internal balance, the fiscal deficit, which is what the budget has to relate to immediately. Then you have the external balance, which is the current account deficit, which shows you how much are you drawing from the rest of the world, how much are you living beyond your means, and how much is Barack Obama, Angela Merkel, all these people, how much are they willing to subsidize you? And inflation, that I think everybody understands, is the rate of increase in prices. So everybody says that India is the only bright spot. So if you look at these are the IMF projections, and you look at India, India is virtually the only country which is going at it's going faster, 7.5. China is way below at 6.3. Yay, what fun! And then India is going the same rate. China is actually come down. I was a mistake. 6.3. It's coming down, right? So not only are we going faster than China, we are actually maintaining our growth despite what's happening all over the world, despite the uncertainty that's happening all over the world. So these are good times, it would seem. So India certainly seems to be the only bright spot, the only eye in the BRICS, BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. What is happening? Okay. So the problem really is in India, if you look at it, is that agriculture, even though it's not a very important part of our GDP, it's a very small share of our GDP, roughly 15%, 12-15%. The percentage of the population dependent on agriculture is still very large, close to 55%. So even when we talk of India being the only bright spot, the fact is that what happens in agriculture matters hugely, not directly in terms of GDP, but in terms of rural demand. So unless agriculture does well, the people living in the rural areas will not demand products manufactured by industry, will not demand the services. So what happens to agriculture is very important. Unfortunately for us, what happens in agriculture depends very much on what happens in the monsoon. Are the rain gods kind to us, unkind to us? Especially the southwest monsoon. The northeast monsoon is not that important. So this is rain gods, not really been very kind to us. This has been the second year we've had not a very good rainfall, but it's not been too bad. So hopefully agriculture will not be a big stumbling block. Okay. If you look at GDP growth since 2001, clearly what we're seeing is that India did move close to 10%. That's when we thought we catch up to China, double-digit growth, etc. But there was a sharp dip that was after the global financial crisis. After that, the economy has been recovering.
Please note that from January 2015, we have a new method of calculating the GDP. So that does give some kind of an artificial jump. So the numbers are not strictly comparable, but even so, the fact of recovery cannot be denied. So clearly, the Indian economy is recovering. The unfortunate part is that growth is not uniform across all sectors. Some sectors are growing very rapidly, some sectors are not growing very rapidly. Particularly, if you look at manufacturing. Manufacturing has not been doing very well. And why is this important? Why is manufacturing growth so important? Manufacturing share in GDP again is only about 16-17%. So why is manufacturing growth so important? Absolutely, jobs. The jobs come in manufacturing. The jobs don't come in services. Those people who join the services sector, even a BPO, requires a certain level of literacy, requires a certain familiarity with English. And unfortunately, even though we are on the last in the past, the highest population in the world, overtaking China once again, in population again, Hindi is not spoken by a majority of the people in the world. It is English which you want, even if you want a BPO. So if you want to join the service sector, you need to have a certain level of skill, a certain level of education, particularly you want to join KPOs, where you want to kind of add a little bit and not just say with an American accent, hi, hi, something like that. That's what the average BPO person says, right? And you can cultivate that. But if you want to analyze balance sheets, if you want to do some legal documentation, you require a certain amount of education. So services cannot give you the job. Agriculture productivity is very low. So if you want to give jobs to our millions, and that really is a key requirement of economic growth, we want jobs. What do all of you want more than anything else? Jobs, right? That's why all of you are here. You want jobs. And so the manufacturing sector that actually offers a maximum number of jobs. So we want to ensure that manufacturing picks up. Unfortunately, manufacturing has not been doing very well. Why? Because investment, that is fixed capital formation, gross fixed capital formation, has not done well. Again, after the peak, it again dipped and dipped very sharply. So this really is a problem that nobody seems willing to invest. The private corporate does not seem willing to invest. Tatas, Birlas, Ambanis, nobody seems willing to invest. If you don't invest, you don't get jobs because there is no output. So when nobody invests, if the private corporate sector is not willing to invest, who is there left to invest? Absolutely, government is the only resource. If the private corporate is not willing to invest, there is nobody but the government. How can the government invest? Where does the government invest from? Yeah, that's where they will invest. But where do they get the money to invest from? Either by taxes or by disinvestment or by cutting expenditure somewhere else, right? So there are no two ways of doing this. So if the private corporate sector is not investing, there is nobody but the government who can invest. And where will the government invest from? It's not rocket science. Either tax more, which none of us would like, they could disinvest more, which we're all quite happy with, or they could cut expenditure. But they should cut expenditure in the right places. They should not cut expenditure like the UK government did. They cut expenditure on capital expenditure. That means the UK government did not cut current expenditure. That means MP salaries, MLA salaries, Babu salaries, they were all kept unchanged. Or maybe went up. But schools, bridges, hospitals, power sector, power plants, all these expenditures were cut. So you need to conserve your expenditure, but conserve it in the right direction. Cut current expenditure, but not and you drink yourself silly. You're stone cold the next morning. What do you have to show for it? Hangover, right? So nothing else you can get. You can bring yourself so silly. But if that same paycheck, you to use it as margin money for a car loan, for a housing loan, next morning you still have part ownership of that car. The bank has most of the ownership, part ownership of the house, but you still have something to show for it and no headache, right? So that really is the difference. So the government also should decide, do I spend my money on current consumption, which does not give me anything at all? Or do I spend it on capital expenditure? So that really is a choice between for the government, particularly if corporates are not investing. So if you look at the fiscal roadmap of the government unveiled in March 2015, so this is the fiscal deficit. FD is the fiscal deficit. So that's what they wanted. They wanted it to be 3.9 this year. So March 2016, they wanted it to be 3.9. Chances are that the government will achieve this 3.9 this year, maybe through some clever juggling of numbers. But the big question now is that do you want to stick to that 3.5 for next year? Or do you think we can run with a little bit more? Can the government spend a little bit more, not get so fixated about the fiscal deficit? What is so satisfying about 3.5? What was the US budget deficit immediately after the naval crisis? Any idea? More than 10%, yes. So when the US government runs 10% deficit, it's fine. When India runs it, fiscal profligacy, irresponsibility, every other word is possible. Why? One key difference is I told you, because when the US spends more, they are able to flood the world with those dollars and really nothing very much happens. So the Indian government does not have that liberty. So clearly you cannot spend widely, but there is a difference, as I always say, between fiscal profligacy and fiscal pragmatism. The question right now is, do you want to be pragmatic or do you want to be profligate? Or do you want to kind of look at the budget numbers, you're looking at always at Washington, is Washington happy with what I'm doing? Is Brussels happy with what I'm doing? Is the IMF happy with what I'm doing? You want to stick to that 3.5. So that really is a key question before day 3 as he sets down. Look at the external front. On the external front, the number that you really should be looking at is the trade balance really. The last line, but if you look at the export numbers, which is the green, clearly what you see is that exports have been dipping. Our export performance has been really bad. Throughout January this year, almost the entire year, exports have not done well. The latest numbers, January 2016 for share numbers, is a 14 consecutive months of decline in the rate of growth of export. So clearly, even though the external front, which was the cause for our 91 crisis, we seem to be on safe territory. There doesn't seem to be a problem, but it's at a very low level of equilibrium. Okay? Frank's front, we're all doing much better, as you know. Raghuram Gandhi has been called the inflation hawk, inflation warrior, every other such name. And on the price front, certainly our numbers have come down from close to 10%. Inflation is now very manageable. Latest numbers were 5.6, 5.7, depending on how you want to round it up. So inflation clearly is well within control. So what are the near-term challenges? So clearly we need to do something to revive investment. As I said, question is, what do we do to revive investment? What is government's role in it? We need to reverse the decline in the manufacturing sector. Manufacturing sector growth is slowed down. If we don't give jobs to our people, what we call today the demographic liability, with so many of the youngsters over here and people like me very much in a minority, okay? So unless you give jobs to these people, they will take to arms. They will join the Jat reservation crisis. They will join the students shouting in JNU, Delhi University. If all these people really had to worry about their jobs, maybe they would not have that much time. But we will say that, I know it's a very controversial statement, but we really need to do something to their jobs. We need to improve governance in this country. I think almost this is something that nobody will dispute, right? Anybody and everybody who lives in this country, that is more, we need to do something desperately to improve governance, starting with the big C, which is what? Big C, what is that? Corruption, right? Corruption is what really holds us back at every level, whether it's a passport, whether it's a driving license, whether it's an Aadhaar card, there's always something that perhaps some people call very nicely speed money, but basically it's nothing but corruption, right? So we need to improve governance. We need to ensure that we don't have these millions of cases in the Supreme Court. While the Supreme Court judges have holidays, 2 months vacation, 1 month vacation, while all the cases just keep lining up. We need to do something about governance. We need to improve our infrastructure, both physical as well as social. Roads, railways, bridges, social, education, health, etc. We need to have structural reform. There are 3 factor markets: land, labor, capital. The capital market needs a fair amount of reform, particularly after the setting up of SEBI. But as far as labor and land is concerned, these markets have really not been reformed. We need to do something. We need to do something desperately about legal reform, but ultimately, it is any citizen, the ultimate refuge of a citizen is the court. If you are not going to get redressal, you're not going to get justice in the court. Of course, if you see our lawyers today, you might wonder whether you never, talk about courts and lawyers and getting justice. But the fact is, the courts are meant to be the ultimate refuge of any citizen, which is why even the jail student, what does he do when he tries his life is threatened? He appeals to the Supreme Court, because the court is the ultimate refuge, which is supposed to preserve all our rights, as it is given in the Constitution. Okay, so these are the near-term challenges in general. On the external side, what do? We need to ensure that the US interest rates in the US, after being below zero, close to zero for a very long time, since the crisis, are now being inching up slowly. We have to see whether the US Federal Reserve will continue to raise interest rates. And what does that mean for India? Because if interest rates in the US are good, nobody is going to invest in India, right? So we have to see that what happens really. Will the US Federal Reserve continue to hike interest rates? We need to see whether Europe and Japan has had a lost decade. Japan is virtually now grown. So we need to see whether these two in very important parts of the global economy will they find their mojo when they get their act together again. We also need to get concerned about the slowdown in China. It's all very well to say that we're going faster than China. But the fact is that the slowdown in China impacts the entire economy, entire world economy. Much as we like to compare ourselves with China, the fact is that what happens in India doesn't really matter very much to the global economy. But what happens in China matters hugely to the global economy. So a slowdown in China has enormous implications for us and the global economy. There are geopolitical tensions. The Middle East is almost ready forever to almost burst into flames. You don't know what's happening in Syria. You don't know what the outcome of the refugee crisis is going to be. You don't know what the ISIS is going to do next. So there are huge geopolitical tensions, and we in India live in a part of the world which is very susceptible to these geopolitical tensions. Terrorism, of course, as I said again, is like governance and corruption in this country. We've all lived with it for so many years. But if we thought seriously about it, maybe we wouldn't live here anymore. Okay, so but despite all this, why am I optimistic about India? Mainly because commodity prices, especially oil prices, are very low. And this is a huge plus for India because we import close to 80% of our oil. If you look at oil prices so low, in fact, the prediction is that oil will come down to $20 a barrel. When the Modi government was voted into power, it was $108 a barrel. So you can imagine the sharp decline. So that's made it possible for the country. It helps you in three ways. This oil subsidies, the government is able to reduce subsidies. It helps you on your inflation front because prices of anything related to oil will not go up. It also helps you on the current account deficit. Okay, so on oil prices being low is a huge plus. The monsoon has not been as bad as we thought it would be. The government has started various reform measures. There is an emphasis on governance. It will take a long time, maybe before we see it translate over the ground, but there is some emphasis. This is the word union, because India is a union of states. That means the idea of our constitutional framework was that all states and the union will work together. Unfortunately, immediately after independence, because we want a very strong central government and the Congress party is very centralist in its approach, the idea was we had a center which was doling out things to the states. Given how disparate we are, how different we are, the different states of the country are so different from each other, the only way you can really pull together is we accept that there is unity literally in diversity and allow the states to decide their own priorities. So in a state like Kerala, if you give money and say you must have Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan, what is Kerala going to do with that money? Every elected mandate is already educated, he's so educated, he doesn't want to do any work. He thinks he's too educated. But he might want something else. So in Bihar, Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan might make sense because it's still a place where literacy levels are very low. Kerala is not a state where you need to improve literacy levels. You might need to improve the road infrastructure. You might need to improve the power infrastructure. So the idea is that give the money to the states because it is not the center's money to give, it's not the union's money to give. Then union and states have to work together as equal partners. So this is one significant change I think that the Modi government has done. And this is how I like to see it. You have everybody pushing the elephant, pulling the elephant, all in one direction. Earlier, what happened was the union government had one view, the states had another view. And when you have different parts of the country pulling in different directions, you really could not get any traction. Okay, so this is why I think I'm most hopeful of all, because states are closest to the people. Every state will know what the people want. So to sum up, how do I see it? I say GDP growth okay, we've done reasonably okay. April to December was 7.2. Last year, the figure in brackets was last year's number. So we've done reasonably okay. Advanced estimate is 7.6. So we realize that we're faster than last year. The fiscal deficit target is 3.9 for this year. It was 4.1 last year. And the actual number to date, we've already done 88% of the fiscal deficit we've already incurred. But last year was 99%. So we're a little bit better. Okay. So this reminds me of my son, who's my second son is very naughty in class. And so he used to come back with his report card, which obviously was not very flattering. And the first thing he'll tell you, he's taking a list of all the children who got low marks in him. So finally, when I look at this marks, I know that A, B, C, D, X, Y, Z got less than him, so I shouldn't be too harsh on him, right? So if you look at the fiscal deficit again, it's got 88%, but last year it was 99%. So we're better. We should be only at about 75%, and then 88%. Current account deficit is 1.5%, very good, it was about 5% earlier. Inflation again, as I said, its CPI is 5.7. Economics is all about scarcity. It's a very boring subject. It keeps telling you, oh, there's only this much, price, limit amount, everybody, how do you cut your coat according to your cloth, take away from eggs, give it to the wild. So economics is all about scarcity, not a very happy science, which is why it's called the dismal science. There's never enough to satisfy everybody. And what is the first lesson of politics? To completely disregard the first lesson of economics. Because if you read the first lesson in economics, when you would tax small, you would spend carefully, you would tell everybody, pay for your water, pay for your power, I will not subsidize you. And then will you do that? Not if you want to get reelected, right? So in democracy, particularly, the first lesson of politics is to disregard everything that the economy is saying. But at the same time, if you were to do all of that, then you yourself might not get reelected. So there has to be a balance, because ultimately we want growth also. So you cannot be completely fiscally imprudent. So let's see what JP will do. And I just hope that I thought I'd end with this on a slightly lighter note. So here's this poor little Indian, skinny, scrawny fellow with the FM quite well fed, right? In his Nehru jacket, he's walking away and he says, are you sure you're getting this inside? Because he can't find it. But there must be something, because you promised him all this, right? Okay, so I hope it doesn't die as bad. You don't have to hunt that down deep enough. Maybe we just have to look a little more carefully at the budget document, which is what I hope all of you will do. When you look at the budget speech and hear the budget speech and look at the budget documents, I don't expect you to look at the documents. That's my body law. But at least you will listen to some part of the speech or see the news of this, I hope. And just see, look at this year's budget and see, is it economics that predominates? Is it politics? Or has the FM managed to kind of bridge the two? Has he been able to find some kind of meeting ground? And also, look, remember, this time the budget, we are still 3 years away from the next election. So this year, my sense is that there will be a little bit more economics involvement. But before the next election, it will be all about nothing but politics, right? But your take, you have to please look at it and then tell me if you can how to think of it. Now I have, I think, 15 minutes. I rushed through maybe, but please, I'm open to any and every question as I said, so shoot. Yeah. I mean, maybe if you give a mic to him, it might be a little nicer. Yeah. Yeah, just tell me a little bit, I mean, who you are and a little bit so I know. Yeah, quickly. Or I can tell you, maybe I still need to right? You tell me and I speak. What is your question? Yeah, we don't.
He's there to grab his mic.
Yeah, just I can speak from there. I repeat, don't worry, the mic is not working. I'm speaking. Never mind, tell me.
I just said that there's a complication between economics and politics. Is there a question that in politics, the government is only a supplier producer, which has make a monopoly in the market, because whatever they would like to supply, whatever they would like to give the services as per their wishes, they can do so, and we are compelled to get it. Because some of the things like that, electricity and gas, something like that, we are compelled because we have to get on their prices. So could we say that they are the only means politics, only the monopoly they have made?
So very quickly, the question that he had is that is government the only supplier of products or services, and are we compelled to buy whatever the government says? So I don't know all of you what would you agree? Should the government be in the business of supplying anything? How many of you have been to a Ashoka hotel? Yes? And how many have you been to the Taj Mansingh or Taj Palace? Is there any comparison? How many of you have traveled by Air India? How many of you have traveled by jet or any of the other airlines? Is there a difference? Asman Zameen ka farak hai. Why? One is produced by Government of India, one is produced by the private guy, driven by profit. He wants taxpayer money, keep on paying. The aircraft wait. Minister आ रहा है कि अभी घर नाश्ता कर रहा है. आप सब लोग भूल जाओ. तब तक आप साथ में कभी बहुत ही आप देख लो हम टीवी में दिखा देंगे. Okay? So will an airline like that? What is India's biggest USP? Always on time. So should the government be in the business of producing anything at all? My government should not be in the business of producing anything. The government should be only in the business two areas where the government necessarily has to produce. Why? Law and order. We cannot have Ranveer Sena, Alto Sena, this Sena, that Sena protecting different communities or classes or etc. Government of India, external aggression, internal security. Printing of money. You and I can't start printing money. So government of India's job is limited to very few things. But yes, even in the area of goods and services, what must government of India produce? Government of India must do something about primary education. You will find n number of private universities at the higher level. Is anybody going to Dungri Talaya and setting up a little private school over there for the digital learners? No. Why? Because there's no money to be made in it. You can't gain the private sector. The private sector is about making money. And nothing wrong with it, as long as they do it ethically. The government must cater to those who cannot, for a variety of reasons, have access. Because what you private sector only answers when you have money in your pocket. When I go to the shop, however hungry I am, the shopkeeper is not going to give me a loaf of bread. I take out that buy sutra, he'll promptly give me a loaf of bread. So the government's job is to cater to those who are not in the market. Primary education, primary healthcare, defense, internal security, printing of currency. So everything else, leave it to the private sector. But yes, if you have only one producer, you will have what you have, like you have with Microsoft and Windows. So you need to have multiplicity of players, and you need to have a regulator who is truly independent and is not looking over his shoulder to monthly क्या बोल रहा है, right? So if you have an independent regulator, free entry, free exit, a large number of players, like you have in the market for aloo. When you go to the shop, when you go to the mandi to buy aloo, you don't have to ask in 10 shops to ask the aloo ka dam kahan ka hai. Because you know that competition ensures that nobody can charge excess, right? So this is what the government should do, limit its role, particularly as far as production is concerned, limit its role to enabling. Government's job is to enable, not to produce. Any more questions? Yeah.
Hello, ma'am. I'm Shubham.
Yeah.
So basically, my question is that earlier we used to calculate our inflation rate using WPI.
Yeah.
And all of us know that inflation or negative growth is a cause of worry for an economy. So basically, our WPI is at minus 0.73. Is it a cause of worry right now? Should we be worried about it?
No, I don't think so. For the simple reason that even though WPI is negative, the CPI is still very positive, and all of us, I think, are consumers. We're not really at the wholesale level. So I think that is why, in fact, the Reserve Bank of India moved towards CPI for inflation targeting, because I said what hurts people most is the price at the retail level, not at the wholesale price level. If you want, we can discuss outside after, because I think this will get a little technical for the rest of the crowd. But certainly, I don't think we need to worry about WPI, because in fact, even though there's deflationary tendencies all over the world, in India we have so much pent-up demand. But there really isn't a question of any kind of deflation in India. Yeah? Yes? Some questions?
I have two questions. The
Yeah,
first
one. I think I'll give one.
Sorry.
Right?
Yeah.
So whichever one is more important.
First one is that India's GDP rate is going good enough, but the gross value that we are talking about is at 1.83 trillion, and China is way ahead at $11 trillion. So can India come ahead? Can India beat China, and how much time will it take to that? And the next question that is, I think,
I think despite all my journalist comments about China, we still fixate on China. And don't worry about China, because China, what they've done, they liberalize their economy, but not their political structure. So China really could be sitting on, it's like a pressure cooker. I think the pressure cooker is a very good example to describe what happens in India. So anytime when it's very angry with the government, so just like a pressure cooker, pressure builds up, the whistle and it goes up. So it's hi, Murdabad, Zindabad, anybody is free to go on hunger strike. I think the Haryana chief minister is going to have a hunger strike at Jantar Mantar because he's protesting against it. So in India, whenever there's tension, you're free to release that tension. And that itself is a safety valve. In China, what happens? What happened in Tiananmen Square? People came to protest, the Chinese government just shot them. End of story. You're dead, you can't protest. So this is actually, so let's not laugh. These are freedoms that we have won with a great deal of struggle. But the only thing is that these freedoms are valuable to us because we are all, our basic needs are met. There is a huge India elsewhere, outside this room, particularly in the village, whose basic needs have not been met. And if their basic needs are not met, then we could soon slip into anarchy. So this really is a reason. Let's not worry about China. They're doing things their way. So we really don't know what happens as the average Chinese. Once your stomach is full, you want the right to say hi, hi, right? But only when your stomach is full. Today, if you ask me, I don't know when you're going to get your next meal. You want to say hi, hi? I said, please, give me my next meal. Forget the hi, hi, right? So in China, their stomachs are all full. So now they want political freedom. So struggle for China is to manage that transition peacefully. Because the moment you allow people to question you, they are going to question you. And then they're not going to take whatever you say for granted. I told you China, let's not compare with China, but you still ask me about China. You didn't take it for granted, which is very good. You're a thinking Indian, you're a questioning Indian. You are a Chinese who would never dare to ask you that question. अरे मैंने बोल तो दिया. Why are you comparing me with China? फिर भी तुम वही question उठा रहे हो. True. No, one question over. Now, can I hear some girls' voices? I'm talking. Yeah, please. Yeah. Where? Women's empowerment. We just heard Dr. Gopinath talk about women's empowerment. Beti Bachao, Desh Bachao, and all that. Where is the Desh getting Bachao? Where is the Beti? Please. Yeah.
The results of the various public sector banks that have come up, the non-performing debt. So how is that going to be dealt in the budget? Because it's basically taxpayers' money. The government should not actually, do anything for the public sector banks with the taxpayers' money, but yes, something needs to be done.
So that's a slightly complex question because I think public sector banks, one of the reasons why they are business is of course because of government insecurity. So the public sector banks go on financing India, they go on financing Vijay Mallya because they have to be a member. They do a lot of things which are not commercial sense, they don't make commercial sense. But the public sector banks are also in this mess partly because after global financial crisis, when nobody was willing to lend, what did the private sector banks do? ICICI, HDFC, all these banks, Kotak Mahindra, Access, they all stop lending. Because that is the time in the economy. They told the public sector banks continue to lend, continue to lend. So they lend to infrastructure. Over the world, growth was falling. So it's such a complex question. So the ideal thing really should be that if you have a public sector bank, you should be very clear. Do you want the public sector bank to function as a commercial entity, or do you want it to achieve government social objective? What is the present government's big achievement? Jan Dhan Yojana. Just go back home and see how many Jan Dhan Yojana accounts have been opened by ICICI Bank, HDFC Bank, Kotak Mahindra, and how much by Punjab National Bank, State Bank of India, etc., etc. Just go look at Leh. See if there's any other branch over there apart from State Bank of India. So if you use a public sector bank to achieve your social objectives, there will be some distortion and you'll have to pay a price. The ideal thing to do would be to have public ownership, at the same time not have so much interference in their day-to-day operations. Don't ring up and say, please give Vijay Mallya a loan, you should not be giving a loan. So that is a little difficult. Governments like to interfere. Governments like to kind of say, do this, do that. So that is actually maybe we can have some kind of a bank board bureau and we can ensure that the banks are allowed to function on commercial lines. That perhaps would be an ideal. Unfortunately, we don't live in an ideal world. So we have public sector banks that are neither fish nor fowl, doing something that the government tells them, and because they do something that the government tells them, and their salaries are fixed, there's no reward for taking risks, then public sector banks are in the mess that they are. So ultimately, taxpayer money does come to their rescue. But also remember that it is not only in the case of public sector banks that taxpayer money is put to bail out. US taxpayer money was put to bail out Citibank. Is Citibank a public sector bank? Most certainly not. So this really is the problem with banking. Banking is a very unique kind of business. If a bank were to close down, then the entire economy will come to a standstill because of what I know is interlinkages between banks. So regardless of whether it's privately owned or publicly owned, ultimately taxpayer rescue money will have to be put to the rescue of these banks. So what should you do? You should ensure that these banks function as efficiently as possible. So you ensure that the government does not interfere. You ensure that you have a good regulator. Reserve Bank of India was also one thing. Reserve Bank of India turned a blind eye to many things that it should not have done. So that's why we are in it. So yes, ultimately taxpayer money will go to bail out these banks. Not a very good thing, But this is the price that you have to pay for public ownership in today's imperfect world. Yep.
Yes.
I think this point, okay, one more. Okay.
Good afternoon. I have a question.
That's okay, that's okay. Okay.
Should the government actually go for disinvestment in profit-making enterprises? Because basically, because the profit-making enterprises actually have to shell out, as you said, the SBI has to shell out with the Jan Dhan Yojana, and the private sector banks do not have to comply with these.
No, they do have to comply. This is a
Yeah. So, do we actually need to look into disinvestment in these profit-making enterprises? Is it actually selling out our family silver? So that is my question.
This is an issue that has been raised a number of times. Are we selling our family silver? The question is that you need to maintain the silver. Why do we need to have an HAL or BHEL, etc.? Why should the government be in the business at all? When these were set up in the initial years of independence, when Nehru said these are temples of modern India. That's why he thought define the public sector as temples of modern India. Now we don't need these temples, right? We have enough and more of every kind of temple. That is our problem really, right? So what we need to do is cash in on those and use that money wisely. So if we were to disinvest and use that money for a trip of MPs to Rio de Janeiro to see how Hindi is being implemented in Brazil, certainly not. But if you're going to sell disinvest in DHL and you're going to set up a power plant, you're going to set up a road, the most important enabler really is the road. Roughly 40% of our agriculture produce really rots because the farmers are not able to bring it to the city or the town. Build a road. Look at the mobile revolution. It's the biggest enabler. So that is what the government should do. You shouldn't be in the business of producing anything, in my way of thinking. But if you disinvest, remember that you will never get that silver back. So when you sell your family silver, you should ensure that that silver is exchanged for another kind of silver, which is productive, which keeps giving you a return. So that's nothing wrong with this investment. There's no reason for government to hang on to this thing. So certainly disinvest, but spend that money wisely. I think I have just 5 more minutes.
The last question here.
Last question, great.
Thanks, ma'am. At least I got a chance. General engineer mail, ma'am.
Sorry.
So rejected from every side, from all I and every place I got a chance. For all engineers. First of all, ma'am, I'm very much privileged to see you from ET now. Actually, I'm a big fan from Arnab sir also. Arnab Swami and.
I'm not so sure I'm very happy with the comparison anyway.
No, ma'am, but he's a good person and you are also. So, just a simple question, ma'am. PM Modi is doing a very good job and many schemes are being launched. Sir, give me one.
No, that's the question. We can argue about the good job.
He's doing a good job and is creating more and more GK questions and more schemes every day. So, simple question is that, ma'am, all these yojanas, Digital India Week and Pradhan Mantri Jan Dhan Yojana and Made in India, Make in India, too much glamorization, propaganda, crores
What's
and
your
crores.
question? Come to the question.
Coming. Ma'am, give me one.
What religion you talk too much? Quick, let's go first.
Just 1 minute. So, ma'am, too much is spent on these activities. Last month in Mumbai also the stage was one alive and many crores were spent. So, is these money spending affecting all of us, middle class, rich people are getting the benefits of out of that? But do we find that the poor class, who is giving all his savings in Jan Dhan Yojana, and he doesn't even know that that money will be given to him after his death, and Modi government is getting too much.
Still waiting for questions. And now the mark you are giving you 0. So tell me fast.
I am coming now. So too much capital is generated from their money, but these people do not get a chance or they do not have the knowledge that what the government or what these schemes are doing for them. So simple, I want a simple answer from you, that from all the media persons and all these journalists and big people, what they think that these schemes are doing for poor people or the people who do not have a single thing to eat, what they feel for GDP and all these things. This is a big thing for them. So simple answer, ma'am.
So you want a simple answer to a long question, right? That is today's younger generation. They want instant karma. Okay, doesn't happen. Okay, so that nobody can have instant prosperity. But certainly, as it could have been, it should have been, what it could do by him. But I will challenge anybody in this room to say that today every Indian is better. What we need to do is try and make is improve the status better, not only socially, politically, economically, and I think for that, I think every one of us sitting in this room must remember that we are a very privileged, minute section of this population. And the best thing that we can do to ensure that that person for whom his heart is beating, ensure that the right thing is done by him, by ensure that we do our duty by this country, by being law-abiding citizens, and most importantly, paying our taxes. The problem is that in this country, a very minuscule proportion of people pay their taxes, and there is no social appropriate for those who don't pay their taxes. So I think if we did that, instead of asking the government what can you do for me, realize that each one of us has a duty to not, when you get into the metro, don't deface the metro, don't deface public property. If you're angry, go home and burn your own damn car. Don't burn the duty-free bus. Okay? Pay your taxes. If you do all these things, I believe me, the country will be far better than it is today. Don't pay bribes. Stand in the line, it will get done. It just takes more time, it takes more patience. But remember, this is a hard-won freedom and we need to live up to it. Thank you.
Mythili always inspires me. It really